Johann Sleeden in The Protestant Vision of History by Alexander Kess recounts the making of the Protestant vision of history and Johann Sleeden's involvement. The introduction, in large part, establishes why Kess decided to write this book. She feels that Sleeden's contribution has often been diminished by other historians. She establishes this by going through the work of other historians and pointing out their miscomings, such as the minimal amount of Sleeden's personal communication other historians have used. She points that she has recovered and utilized much more than any other historian before. In fact, Sleeden's personal communications and other personal letters that mention Sleeden are the bulk of Kess's evidence. In the first chapter, Kess does a short biography on Sleeden because she believes there is no way to understand Sleeden's work and impact without understanding where he came from. This is also where she begins to establish Sleeden's connections, many of them from France, that would later be imperative to his success. Chapter 2 recounts Sleeden's move back to Germany, describing how his existing connections from France afforded him an easy transition and then later on an important role in Germany's attempt to kickstart the Reformation in their country. This chapter also begins Sleeden's task of writing an official Protestant history. The third chapter continues to delineate Sleeden's life. This time, Kess focuses on his success as a historian. Despite his German roots, Sleeden wrote about French history in Latin. In part, this was probably because of his French influences. Kess stated that Sleeden's work was reprinted for hundreds of years, which for her becomes more evidence for why Sleeden and his work deserve more attention. In the fourth chapter, Kess focuses on Sleeden's work by going over methodology, content, and sources. She argues that he represents a modern historian due to his emphasis on evidence and the shift away from church-centered histories and toward state-centered histories. Further, Sleeden represented a fierce dedication to truth and impartiality. Sleeden, unlike previous historians, included both the church and the state because you can't have one without the other, according to him. Here is another reason why Kess believes Sleeden deserves more attention. Kess argues that Sleeden is unlike any historian before and therefore should be studied more. In the final two chapters, Kess speaks about the race for a German print of Sleeden's work, and subsequently the many copies produced. She then accounts at some length all of Sleeden's predecessors. In France, Kess says the reception was overwhelming. People didn't have the same personal connection to Sleeden's work because they were French and not German. However, they still wanted a copy of his work. Finally, she describes the long-term impact Sleeden had on French historiography. So why does any of this matter? And how does Alexander Kess's work fit in a historiography class? Firstly, the story of Sleeden's histories is characteristic of everything we've seen before. Historians always seem to think they are doing things better and getting to the real truth in a way previous historians haven't. Just as many other historians, Sleeden wrote in response to histories he disagreed with. In large part, this revolved around church-centered histories that ignored the state influence. Finally, Sleeden's story shows how history modernized over time, how it shifted and became professionalized, which is proof by him being hired to write history. Prior, history was seen as an art form, not a profession. However, this is not the only way this book fits into historiography. Alexander Kess herself is a fine example. Throughout the book, she comments about how everyone else has gotten it wrong. They haven't studied Sleeden enough, and what they have done is full of half-truths, often based on hearsay rather than sound research. We have seen this time and time again, historians attacking other historians as false or wrong. In a way, I think this is what history is, a series of reactions to historians' work, because it wasn't done right, or because we can do it better now. This is a common methodology to claim that other people are wrong as evidence that you are right. However, Kess does have a fairly hefty amount of primary sources to rely on. Further, she does, in a short and certainly condensed way, seem to tell a fair story about Johann Sleeden and his involvement in the Protestant vision of history.